close your eyes and imagine a world where gladiators fight for glory, emperors rule with iron fists, and legions march across continents. This is the story of Rome. From a tiny village on the banks of the Tiber River to the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Rome's rise and fall shaped the destiny of all humanity. Tonight, you'll drift into sleep as we travel through centuries of battles, betrayals, triumphs, and tragedies. This is not just history. This is the epic saga of the Roman Empire, told from beginning to end. The story of Rome begins not with cold facts, but with legends that have survived thousands of years. Imagine ancient Italy around 800 BC. It was a land of small tribes, farmers, and shepherds. Among them rose a tale so powerful that it became the foundation of Rome's identity. The legend of Romulus and Remus. According to the myth, twin brothers Romulus and Remus were the sons of a princess named Rhea Silvia and the war god Mars, abandoned at birth and left to die by the river Tiber. They were miraculously saved by a she-wolf, who nursed them until a shepherd found them. The wolf, wild yet protective, became a symbol of Rome itself, tough, resilient, and untamed. When the brothers grew up, they decided to build a new city. But a tragic quarrel ended in Romulus killing Remus. With that, Romulus became the first king, and the city took his name. Rome, of course. Historians doubt if this story is literally true. Yet it carried a message. Rome was born in blood, survival, and destiny. Even the idea that Mars, the god of war, was their father suggested that Rome was fated for conquest. This myth gave Romans a sense of greatness long before they became powerful. But Rome was not just myth. Archaeologists have discovered real evidence of early settlements around the hills of Rome, especially the Palatine Hill. These were simple wooden huts built by shepherds and farmers. Over time, these people learned to trade, farm, and defend themselves. Slowly, a small community began to grow stronger. Unlike their Greek neighbors who focused on philosophy, the early Romans were practical people. They valued hard work, discipline, and loyalty. By the 7th century BC, Rome was influenced by a nearby advanced people called the Etruscans. The Etruscans were skilled builders and engineers. They taught Rome how to construct arches, walls, and temples. They also introduced religious rituals, the use of the toga, and even gladiatorial games. Rome adopted many Etruscan customs, but also added its own twist. His ability to borrow ideas from others and then improve them became one of Rome's greatest strengths. Another key influence came from the Greeks, especially in southern Italy. The Greeks gave Rome new ideas about art, literature, and government. In a way, Rome was like a sponge, absorbing the best from surrounding cultures and making it Roman. So, the first chapter of Rome's history is about survival and adaptation. From a tiny settlement born of myth, it grew into a small but ambitious city-state. The people of Rome were tough, resourceful, and determined. They believed the gods were on their side, and they carried within them a hunger for greatness. As we move forward, we'll see how this little city, once just huts on a hill, would rise to challenge kings, defeat enemies, and eventually lay the foundations for one of the greatest empires in history. After the mythical founding by Romulus, Rome entered a period ruled by kings. This stage, known as the Roman Kingdom, lasted from about 753 BC to 509 BC. It was a time when Rome was still small, but the foundations of its culture, religion, and politics were laid. According to tradition, Rome had 7 kings. First was Romulus, who not only gave his name to the city, but also organized its earliest institutions. He divided the people into tribes, created a council of elders called the Senate, and even established the first Roman army. His reign was marked by violence and cleverness. The most famous story from his time is the rape of the Sabine women. Since Rome lacked women, Romulus invited the neighboring Sabines to a festival and then seized their women to become wives. Brutal as it sounds, this event symbolized how Rome would always expand, even through conflict, and then unite its enemies as part of itself. After Romulus came kings like Numa Pompilius, who was said to be peaceful and wise. Numa created many of Rome's religious traditions. He introduced the worship of gods like Vesta, Jupiter, and Mars, and set up the priesthoods that would later become central to Roman life. He wanted Rome not just to be strong in war, but also to respect the gods. For Romans, religion was never separate from daily life. It was woven into farming, politics, and the military. They believed that Rome's success depended on keeping the gods happy. Other kings focused on building the city itself. Tullus Hostilius was warlike, conquering nearby towns, while Ancus Marcius balanced war and peace, building the first bridge across the Tiber River and founding the port of Ostia. The later kings, especially the Etruscan rulers like Tarquinius, Priscus, and Servius, brought great changes. They expanded Rome, built temples, and began massive construction projects. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer system, dates back to this period. So does the Forum, which became the heart of Roman public life for centuries. But Rome's final king, Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, became infamous for his cruelty and arrogance. He ignored the Senate, ruled like a tyrant, and forced labor on the people. The breaking point came when his son, Sextus Tarquinius, committed a terrible crime against a noblewoman named Lucretia. Her tragic story sparked outrage, and the Romans rose up. Overthrowing the monarchy in 509 BC, this event marked the birth of the Roman Republic. Looking back, the kingdom's stage was short compared to the centuries that followed. It had set the tone for Rome's greatness. The kings gave the city structure, religion, and early power. But the cruelty of Tarquin left a scar. From then on, Romans hated the very idea of kingship. They swore never to be ruled by a king again. This deep system. In 509 BC, the Romans did something extraordinary. They rose up, overthrew their king, and declared that never again would one man rule them as a monarch. From that moment, Rome entered a new phase in its history, the Roman Republic. It was a system that lasted nearly 500 years and became the foundation of Rome's power. The word republic comes from the Latin res publica, meaning the public thing. In other words, Rome now belonged to its citizens, not to a single king. But freedom did not mean chaos. Instead, the Romans built a system of government that tried to balance power and prevent anyone from becoming too strong. At the heart of this system was the Senate. Originally an advisory council of elders, the Senate grew into the most powerful institution in the Republic. It was made up of wealthy aristocrats, called patricians, who controlled much of Rome's land and wealth. Alongside the Senate were the magistrates, elected officials who carried out the laws. The highest magistrates were the consuls. Each year, 2 consuls were elected to lead the government and command the army. But their power was limited. Each consul could veto the other's decisions. This system of checks and balances kept Rome from falling back into tyranny, at least in theory. Still, not everyone had equal power. The majority of Romans were plebeians, ordinary farmers, laborers, and soldiers. At first, they had little say in politics. The patricians dominated government, while plebeians carried the weight of taxes and military service. This inequality led to constant tension, known as the conflict of the orders. Over time, the plebeians fought for more rights. They went on strike, refusing to fight in Rome's wars until their voices were heard. Their persistence worked. Rome created new positions like the tribune of the plebs, officials who could protect ordinary citizens and veto unfair laws. The plebeians also demanded written laws, so the powerful could not bend rules as they pleased. This led to the 12 Tables, Rome's first set of written laws, displayed publicly so all citizens could know their rights. This struggle between patricians and plebeians was not just about fairness, it made Rome stronger. By allowing more people to have a stake in the Republic, Rome created a society where citizens felt loyalty to the state. This unity gave them the strength to fight external enemies together. The Republic also developed a system of citizenship and duty. Romans believed in virtues, courage, pietas, loyalty to family and gods, and gravitas, seriousness and discipline. Serving the Republic, whether as a soldier, farmer, or official, was considered an honor. This deep sense of duty became a core part of Roman identity and helped the Republic survive for centuries. But the Republic was never perfect. Corruption and inequality. When Rome first became a republic in 509 BC, it was far from the mighty empire we imagine today. It was still just one small city among many in central Italy. and it faced enemies everywhere. The early republic was a time of constant war, survival, and determination. These struggles would shape Rome into a warrior society unlike any other. One of Rome's earliest rivals was the Etruscans. Remember, the last kings of Rome were Etruscan, and their neighbors to the north still saw Rome as a threat. The young republic had to defend itself against their attempts to restore monarchy. Every victory Rome earned in these years wasn't just about land, it was about protecting freedom. Romans believed they had thrown off tyranny, and they refused to let kings return. This fierce pride fueled their resistance. To the east, Rome faced the Latins, other small city-states that shared a similar culture and language. At first, these Latin cities were both rivals and allies. Rome fought battles against them but also signed alliances. Slowly, through war and diplomacy, Rome became the leader of the Latin League. Instead of destroying its neighbors, Rome often offered them partnership. This was one of Rome's clever strategies. When they defeated enemies, they sometimes gave them citizenship or alliances, rather than wiping them out. In this way, Rome grew stronger, while other powers weakened. But not all enemies were so easily managed. To the south, the Samnites, a fierce mountain people challenged Rome in a series of brutal conflicts known as the Samnite Wars. These wars tested Rome's endurance. The Samnites fought with guerrilla tactics, using their knowledge of the hills to ambush Roman armies. At times, Rome suffered devastating defeats, such as the humiliating disaster at the Caudine Forks, where Roman soldiers were forced to pass under a yoke as a symbol of surrender. Yet Rome always came back. Their resilience in the face of loss became legendary. Meanwhile, to the north, the most terrifying enemies of all appeared, the Gauls. In 390 BC, a Gallic tribe marched into Italy and crushed the Roman army at the river Ilia. They went on to sack Rome itself, burning much of the city. For Romans, this was a nightmare they never forgot. The image of foreign invaders storming their city haunted them for centuries. But instead of destroying Rome's spirit, the disaster made them more determined. They rebuilt their walls, reorganized their armies, and swore that no enemy would ever take Rome so easily again. Out of these struggles, the Roman military system evolved. The Romans developed the Manipular Legion, flexible formation that allowed their soldiers to fight more effectively on rough terrain. Discipline, training, and organization became the heart of the Roman army. Every Roman citizen was expected to serve, and war became a way of life. Victory was not just about courage, it was about strategy, persistence, and the refusal to give up. These early centuries were filled with constant danger, but they forged Rome's character, surrounded by enemies, scarred by defeats, yet always returning stronger. Rome became a city of iron will. The Romans began to see themselves as destined to rule, because no matter how many times they fell, they always rose again. The small republic that had once overthrown kings was now becoming a regional power. But soon, its ambitions would grow far beyond Italy. Rome's hunger for expansion would bring it face to face with some of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world. By the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, Rome had transformed from a struggling city-state into the dominant power of the Italian peninsula. But this victory didn't come overnight. It was earned through relentless wars, clever diplomacy, and Rome's unique ability to turn enemies into allies. After recovering from the Gallic invasion, Rome focused on expanding its influence. Step by step, they defeated rival tribes and cities. The most difficult of these wars were the Samnite Wars. The Samnites were tough, skilled fighters from the mountains, and their guerrilla tactics frustrated the Roman legions. The wars dragged on for decades. At one point, as mentioned earlier, Rome was humiliated at the Caudine Forks, where its army was trapped in a mountain pass and forced to surrender. But humiliation never stopped the Romans. Instead, it fueled them to rebuild, learn, and fight harder. Eventually, Rome defeated the Samnites and secured control of central Italy. Rome's victory strategy was not just about the battlefield, it was also about how they treated conquered peoples. Unlike other powers who enslaved or destroyed their enemies, Rome often offered defeated cities a place in their system. Some became allies, others were granted partial citizenship, and a few gained full Roman citizenship. This created a powerful network of allies who were loyal to Rome because their future depended on its strength. Rome's generosity and victory, combined with strict discipline, made its power grow steadily. Another great challenge came when Rome fought against the powerful city of Tarentum in southern Italy. Tarentum called for help from a Greek king, Pyrrhus of Epirus. Pyrrhus was a brilliant general who brought with him war elephants, creatures the Romans had never seen before. At first, Pyrrhus won stunning victories against Rome, but his victories came at such a high cost to his own army that he could not sustain them. From this came the phrase Pyrrhic victory, a win so costly it feels like a defeat. In the end, Rome outlasted him, proving again that their strength was not just in single battles, but in their endless determination. By the early 3rd century BC, Rome controlled nearly all of Italy. From the Po Valley in the north to the Greek colonies in the south, Rome was now the master of the peninsula. This gave Rome immense resources, soldiers, farmland, and wealth. It also gave them access to the sea, which would soon become the stage for even greater conflicts. But Rome's conquest of Italy also brought new responsibilities. They now ruled over many different peoples, with different languages, customs, and traditions. Keeping them united was not easy. Yet Rome's system of alliances and citizenship proved flexible enough to hold everything together. Conquered people often fought in Rome's legions, and as they marched under Roman banners, they began to see themselves as part of something bigger than their old tribes or cities. This period marked the true birth of Roman greatness. No longer just a city, Rome was becoming a nation. Its legions were feared, its alliances respected, and its people confident that they were destined for greatness. But with new power came new enemies. Beyond Italy lay Carthage. By the 3rd century BC, Rome had conquered all of Italy, but across the sea stood another giant, Carthage. Founded by Phoenician settlers in North Africa, Carthage had grown into a wealthy trading empire. Its navy dominated the Mediterranean, and its merchants controlled vital sea routes. Rome and Carthage were bound to clash, and when they did, the struggle would last over a century and decide who ruled the Western world. These were the Punic Wars. The First Punic War to 64241 BC began over control of Sicily, a rich island between Italy and North Africa. Rome, until then, had little naval power, but they quickly adapted. Legend says they built their first warships by copying a captured Carthaginian vessel. To balance their inexperience at sea, they added a device called the Corvassa boarding bridge that turned naval battles into infantry fights, something Romans excelled at. After 2 decades of brutal fighting, Rome finally forced Carthage to surrender Sicily. It was Rome's first overseas province, and it marked the beginning of their expansion beyond Italy. But the greatest test came in the Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, led by one of history's most brilliant generals, Hannibal Barca. Hannibal swore eternal hatred against Rome. He launched an invasion so daring it stunned the ancient world. Instead of attacking by sea, he marched his army from Spain, across the Pyrenees, through southern Gaul, and over the towering Alps with war elephants. The journey was brutal, and many of his men and animals died, but Hannibal emerged in Italy with a powerful force. For over a decade, Hannibal crushed Roman armies. At Cannae in 216 BC, he executed one of the greatest battlefield maneuvers ever, circling and destroying a Roman army twice his size. It was Rome's darkest day, yet even in defeat, Rome refused to surrender. The Senate declared, "Rome will never negotiate while a Roman soldier still holds a spear." Instead of facing Hannibal directly again, they switched to a war of attrition, wearing him down while attacking Carthaginian territories elsewhere. The turning point came with Scipio Africanus, a brilliant young Roman general. Instead of chasing Hannibal in Italy, Scipio struck at Carthage's base in North Africa, forced to defend his homeland. Hannibal returned and faced Scipio at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC there. Rome finally defeated Hannibal, ending the war. Carthage was forced to give up its empire, pay heavy tribute, and bow to Roman dominance. But Rome was not done. In the Third Punic War 149–146 BC, Romans, fueled by fear and hatred, utterly destroyed Carthage. After a brutal siege, the city was burned to the ground, its people killed or enslaved. Legend says the Romans salted the earth, so nothing would grow there again. Carthage, once Rome's greatest rival, was erased from the map. The Punic Wars transformed Rome. They proved Rome's unmatched resilience, how even in the face of genius like Hannibal, After the destruction of Carthage in 146 BC, Rome stood as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. But this victory brought more than glory, it brought immense wealth, foreign lands, and new challenges that would slowly tear apart the Roman Republic from within. Rome's expansion spread rapidly. They took control of Spain, rich in silver mines. They dominated North Africa, where Carthage once ruled. They conquered the wealthy kingdoms of Greece, and later turned their eyes to the Eastern Mediterranean, defeating the powerful Hellenistic monarchs who had inherited Alexander the Great's empire. Rome now controlled vast territories from Spain in the west to Asia Minor in the east. For the first time, they were not just an Italian power, but a global one. With these new conquests came enormous wealth. Gold, silver, slaves, and exotic goods poured into Rome. Senators and generals who governed provinces grew incredibly rich. Ordinary Roman soldiers brought home plunder from campaigns. And luxury items from Greece in the east flooded the markets. Rome, once a city of farmers and soldiers, was becoming a metropolis of marble, temples, and theaters. But wealth created problems. The gap between rich and poor grew wider. Aristocrats bought up farmland and turned it into latifondia, huge estates worked by slaves. Meanwhile, small farmers, who had been the backbone of the Republic, struggled to compete. Many lost their land and moved into the city, swelling the poor population. Rome became crowded, noisy, and dangerous. This crisis gave rise to reformers like the Gracchus brothers, Tiberius, and Gaius. They were young tribunes who tried to redistribute land to poor citizens and limit the power of the wealthy elite. But their reforms were fiercely opposed by the Senate. Both brothers were eventually killed in violent clashes, setting a dangerous precedent. Political disputes in Rome were no longer settled by debate but by bloodshed. Another challenge was the rise of professional armies. In the early Republic, soldiers were citizen farmers who served temporarily. But as Rome expanded, wars grew longer and farther from home. Poor Romans, with no land or property, became eager recruits. Generals like Gaius Marius promised them land and rewards in exchange for loyalty. Armies now became devoted not to the Republic, but to their commanders. This shift would eventually allow ambitious men to use their legions to seize power. Rome also faced revolts. The most famous was the slave rebellion led by Spartacus in the 70s BC, a gladiator by training. Spartacus gathered tens of thousands of slaves and defeated several Roman armies before being crushed. His revolt terrified the elite, reminding them that Rome's dependence on slaves was also a source of great danger. By the 2nd century BC, Rome was wealthier and stronger than ever, but the Republic was beginning to crack. Greed, inequality, corruption, and violence were slowly replacing the old values of discipline and duty. Senators fought for personal power. Generals built. By the 1st century BC, Rome was powerful abroad but broken at home. Wealth, corruption, and inequality had weakened the Republic, and ambitious generals were ready to seize power. What followed was a century of civil wars, political murders, and the slow collapse of the Republic. At the heart of this chaos rose a man whose name would echo through history, Julius Caesar. The trouble began with rival generals. Gaius Marius, a military reformer, had built armies from the poor, making soldiers loyal to him instead of the Senate. His rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, marched his legions into Rome itself, a shocking act that showed generals could now use their armies to control politics. Sulla became dictator, purging his enemies and rewriting laws. Though he eventually stepped down, his actions proved the Republic was vulnerable. After Sulla's death, new strongmen emerged. Pirates threatened trade routes, slave revolts erupted, and ambitious leaders like Pompey the Great and Marcus Licinius Crassus rose to power. Pompey was a brilliant general, winning victories in the East and expanding Rome's influence. Crassus was fabulously wealthy, known for putting down Spartacus' rebellion. These men, along with a rising politician named Julius Caesar, formed the first triumvirate, an informal alliance to dominate Roman politics. Julius Caesar began as a young, ambitious noble. Skilled in both politics and war, he won the people's support through generosity and charisma. As governor of Gaul, modern France, Caesar launched a brilliant military campaign. Conquering vast lands and writing detailed accounts that spread his fame back in Rome, his victories made him beloved by the people and feared by the Senate. But the alliance of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus did not last. Crassus died in battle, and Pompey grew jealous of Caesar's power. The Senate, siding with Pompey, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar faced a choice: obey and risk political ruin, or defy the Senate and march on Rome. In 49 BC, Caesar made his decision. Crossing the small river Rubicon with his legion, he declared, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. This act was treason, but it also marked the beginning of civil war. Caesar's forces clashed with Pompey's across the Roman world. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated, leaving Caesar the master of Rome. As ruler, Caesar declared himself dictator for life, shocking Rome's traditions, passed reforms, granting land to veterans, reducing debts, and extending citizenship to provinces. He even planned massive building projects and reforms to strengthen Rome. To many, he seemed like a savior. But to others, he looked like a king, and Romans had sworn never to have a king again. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated in the Senate by a group of conspirators led by Brutus and Cassius, men who believed they were saving the Republic. But instead of restoring freedom, his death plunged Rome into deeper chaos. The Republic was now... The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC was meant to restore freedom to Rome. The conspirators believed that by killing a man they saw as a tyrant, the Republic would be safe. But instead, Caesar's death unleashed even more chaos. Far from saving the Republic, it marked its final collapse. Right after Caesar's murder, Rome was thrown into panic. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, hoped that people would cheer them as liberators. But many Romans loved Caesar for his reforms and generosity. Instead of support, the conspirators faced outrage. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend and ally, gave a fiery funeral speech, turning the crowd against the assassins. Rome erupted into riots, and Brutus and Cassius fled east to raise armies. Out of the power struggle emerged a new alliance, the Second Triumvirate. This was made up of Mark Antony, Marcus Lepidus, and Caesar's adopted son and heir Octavian. Octavian was young only, 19, but ambitious and determined. Together, the triumvirs hunted down Caesar's killers, defeating Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. Both conspirators committed suicide, and the dream of restoring the Republic died with them. But peace did not last. The triumvirate soon fell apart, with Lepidus pushed aside, leaving Antony and Octavian as rivals. Antony allied with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, and their romance became legendary. Together, they dreamed of ruling the East. But in Rome, Antony's ties to Cleopatra were seen as betrayal. Octavian seized this chance to present himself as the defender of Rome against a foreign threat. The conflict climaxed at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his general Agrippa, crushed Antony and Cleopatra's forces. Defeated, Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, where they eventually took their own lives. Octavian returned to Rome as the sole ruler of the Roman world. In 27 BC, Octavian took the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, though he claimed to restore the Republic. In reality, he established a new system, the Roman Empire. Augustus cleverly disguised his power, kept the Senate, the consuls, and the old offices, but he held supreme authority over the army, provinces, and government. Rome would never again be a true republic. Under Augustus, Rome entered a new age known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. For the first time in centuries, civil wars ended and stability returned. Augustus reformed the army, built magnificent monuments, and strengthened the economy. He was not just a ruler, but a master of image, presenting himself as the first citizen rather than a king. Even though he wielded more power than any king before him, the Republic had fallen, replaced by monarchy in all but name. Yet, the Romans embraced it. With Augustus rising as Rome's first emperor in 27 BC, the city entered a new era of peace, prosperity, and stability. This was the beginning of the Roman Empire, and under Augustus, Rome experienced what historians often call its golden age. Augustus was clever in how he ruled. He did not call himself a king. Romans hated that word, but instead took the title princeps, meaning first citizen. Outwardly, the old republic still seemed to exist. The Senate met, laws were passed, and elections were held. But in reality, Augustus held supreme power, commanded the legions, controlled the provinces, and had the final word in all major decisions. He created a system where power was centralized, but wrapped in the traditions of the republic. This balance made his rule acceptable to the Roman people. One of Augustus's greatest achievements was bringing an end to the endless civil wars that had torn Rome apart. His victory at Actium had given him sole control, and for the next 40 years, Rome enjoyed the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Trade flourished. Armies secured the borders, and Roman culture spread across the Mediterranean. For ordinary people, life improved. Roads and aqueducts connected distant provinces to the heart of Rome, and commerce brought food, goods, and wealth into the city. Augustus also rebuilt Rome itself. He famously said, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble." He constructed grand temples, forums, and monuments that showcased Rome's greatness. He built the Arapacis altar of peace, celebrating the stability he had achieved, and restored old temples to honor Rome's gods. His building projects not only beautified the city, but also gave jobs to thousands of workers. Culturally, Augustus's reign was a high point. Writers like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid flourished under his patronage. Virgil's epic, the Aeneid, became Rome's national poem, linking its origins to the hero Aeneas and glorifying Augustus's role as the protector of Rome's destiny. Art, literature, and architecture thrived, reflecting the pride and confidence of a society at its peak. Yet Augustus was not just a builder and patron, he was also a master politician. He reformed the army, ensuring soldiers swore loyalty to him personally. He created a system of provinces governed by officials loyal to him, reducing corruption. He also passed laws to encourage family life and morality, though not all of these were popular. But despite his near-absolute power, Augustus avoided the mistakes of Julius Caesar. He never flaunted his authority too openly. Instead, he acted as if he were merely guiding Rome, not ruling it like a king. This careful balance allowed him to remain in power until his death in AD 14, when he was succeeded by his stepson Tiberius. By the end of Augustus's reign, Rome was stronger than ever. It stretched from Spain to Syria. When Augustus died in AD 14, he left behind not just an empire, but also a dynasty. His family, the Julio-Claudians, would rule Rome for nearly a century. This dynasty produced emperors who ranged from capable and cautious to reckless and cruel. Their reigns showed both the strength and the danger of absolute power. The first was Tiberius, Augustus's stepson. Tiberius was a skilled general and administrator, but he was also gloomy, suspicious, and often unwilling to rule. At first, he continued Augustus's policies and maintained stability. However, as years passed, he withdrew from public life and left much of the governing to corrupt officials. Rumors of treason trials and executions spread fear across Rome. He retired to the island of Capri, leaving the empire in the hands of cruel advisors. While Tiberius kept the empire stable, he was deeply unpopular and left a legacy of mistrust. After Tiberius came Caligula, remembered as one of the most notorious emperors in history. At first, people loved him. He was young, charming, and the great-grandson of Augustus. But soon his behavior shocked Rome. Ancient historians describe him as cruel, extravagant, and possibly insane. He wasted enormous sums on games and spectacles, declared himself a living god, and even planned to make his horse a consul. He executed senators for amusement and terrorized Rome with his unpredictable actions. After only 4 years, Caligula was assassinated by members of his own guard. Next was Claudius, who was Caligula's uncle. At first, people underestimated him because he had a limp and a stutter, but he proved to be one of the more capable Julio-Claudians. Claudius expanded the empire by conquering Britain in AD 43, a major achievement. He also improved Rome's bureaucracy and built important aqueducts. However, Claudius was easily influenced by those around him, especially his ambitious wives. He was eventually poisoned, many believe, by his wife Agrippina, who wanted her son Nero to become emperor. That son was Nero, perhaps the most infamous ruler of ancient Rome. At first, under the guidance of his tutor Seneca, Nero seemed promising. But as he grew older, he turned into a tyrant. He was obsessed with music, theater, and his own image, often forcing senators to watch his performances. He murdered his own mother, Agrippina, his wife, and many political rivals. In AD 64, a great fire swept through Rome, destroying much of the city. Many accuse Nero of starting it, though some historians believe he wasn't responsible. Still, his response was cruel. He blamed Christians, ordering brutal persecutions that made him hated. Eventually, the Senate declared him a public enemy. Facing rebellion, Nero committed suicide in AD 68, ending the Julio-Claudian line. The Julio-Claudian dynasty revealed the dangers of absolute rule. While Augustus had balanced power with tradition, his successors often abused it. Rome saw stability under Tiberius and Claudius, but also terror under Caligula and Nero. The empire survived. But the Republic's old dream of shared power was gone forever. Rome's fate now depended entirely on the character of its emperors, sometimes disastrous. With Nero's death, when Nero died in AD 68, the Julio-Claudian line ended, and Rome was left without a clear successor. What followed was a whirlwind of bloodshed and uncertainty known as the Year of the Four Emperors, AD 69. In just a single year, 4 different men would claim the imperial throne, showing both the fragility and resilience of the Roman Empire. The first was Galba, the governor of Hispania, modern Spain. He marched into Rome with his legions and took power after Nero's death. But Galba was old, harsh, and unpopular. He quickly angered both the Senate and the soldiers by cutting promised rewards and executing rivals without trial. Within months, his own troops turned on him, and he was murdered in the streets of Rome. Next came Otho, a former ally of Galba, who seized power with the help of the Praetorian Guard. Otho was more charming and promised to restore order. But his rule was immediately challenged by another general, Vitellius, whose legions in Germany proclaimed him emperor. The two armies clashed, and Otho, facing defeat, took his own life. Vitellius entered Rome as emperor, but his reign was short and disastrous. He indulged in feasts and extravagance while the empire burned with unrest. Meanwhile, in the eastern provinces, a powerful general named Vespasian, commander of Roman forces in Judea, was declared emperor by his legions. Marching west, Vespasian's forces defeated Vitellius' supporters. Vitellius was captured and killed, and Vespasian finally secured the throne. This ended the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors and began the rule of the Flavian dynasty. Unlike the Julio-Claudians, the Flavians were not of noble descent. They were soldiers, practical men who valued order and discipline over extravagance. Vespasian proved to be a strong and capable emperor. He restored stability after years of turmoil, reformed the finances of the empire, and began massive building projects. Most famously, he started the construction of the Colosseum, Rome's grand amphitheater where gladiators would fight for centuries to come. The Colosseum became a symbol of Roman engineering and spectacle, built partly to win back the people's loyalty after years of civil war. Vespasian's sons, Titus and Domitian, continued the dynasty. Titus is remembered for completing the Colosseum and for 2 major events of his reign. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79, which destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum, and a devastating fire in Rome. Despite these disasters, Titus earned the love of the people for his generosity and leadership. Domitian, however, was far more controversial. He strengthened the empire's borders, fought successful campaigns, and ruled efficiently, but he was also paranoid and authoritarian. He executed senators, silenced critics, and demanded to be worshipped as a living god. His tyranny made him deeply unpopular with the Senate, and in AD 96, he was assassinated in a palace conspiracy. The Flavian dynasty showed Rome's ability to survive chaos. After the assassination of Domitian in AD 96, Rome needed stability again. Out of the turmoil came a remarkable period of wise and capable leadership, known as the Era of the 5 Good Emperors. From Nerva to Marcus Aurelius, these rulers brought nearly a century of peace and prosperity. The Roman Empire reached its largest size and enjoyed what many consider its true golden age. The first was Nerva, chosen by the Senate. He was elderly, but respected. His most important act was setting a precedent. Instead of handing power to a relative, he adopted a capable successor, Trajan. This practice of adoption ensured that the empire would be led by the most talented, not just by bloodline. Trajan ruled at AD 98 to 117, was one of Rome's greatest emperors. A brilliant general and administrator, he expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. His conquest of Dacia, modern Romania, brought vast wealth from gold mines, and his victories in the east added new provinces. Under Trajan, Rome stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. He also invested heavily in public works, building roads, bridges, aqueducts, and the Grand Trajan's Forum. His rule symbolized Rome at its strongest, both militarily and economically. Trajan's successor, Hadrian AD 117 to 138, took a different approach. Instead of endless expansion, he focused on consolidating and defending the empire. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, marking the northern boundary of Roman power. He traveled extensively, inspecting provinces and improving administration. Hadrian also loved Greek culture and promoted art, architecture, and philosophy. His reign balanced strength with culture, leaving behind monuments like the Pantheon, rebuilt during his time. Next came Antoninus Pius AD 138 to 161, whose reign was peaceful and prosperous. Like many emperors, he never led major wars. Instead, he governed calmly, promoted justice, and cared for the empire's finances. His peaceful rule was so stable that the empire hardly felt the presence of its ruler. An era of quiet prosperity that Romans cherished. Finally, there was Marcus Aurelius, AD 161 to 180, the philosopher-emperor. Famous for his book Meditations, he ruled with wisdom and a sense of duty. He believed in Stoic philosophy, teaching self-control and responsibility, but his reign was not easy. He faced wars against Germanic tribes on the northern frontiers and a devastating plague that killed millions. Despite these hardships, Marcus remained dedicated to the empire, earning the title the last of the good emperors. Together, 5 good emperors represented Rome at its best: wise leadership, territorial strength, cultural achievements, and relative peace. The empire thrived. Trade flourished across the Mediterranean, and cities from Gaul to Egypt grew wealthy and advanced. Roman law, roads, and cultures spread everywhere, leaving a legacy that would outlast the empire itself. But this golden age would not last forever. Not the Marcus Aurelius. When Marcus Aurelius died in AD 180, the empire passed to his son Commodus. This marked a turning point. For nearly a century, Rome had been ruled by capable emperors, chosen for their talent. But now power returned to bloodline, and it would prove disastrous. Commodus's reign is often seen as the beginning of Rome's long decline. At first, people hoped Commodus would continue his father's legacy. But unlike Marcus, who was a philosopher and statesman, Commodus was self-indulgent, reckless, and more interested in pleasures than governance. He fancied himself a gladiator, fighting in the arena for sport. While real gladiators fought for survival, Commodus staged his matches so he would always win, humiliating Rome's traditions. He even dressed as Hercules, calling himself the Roman Hercules, and demanded to be worshipped as a living god. Meanwhile, corruption spread through the government. Commodus left much of the administration to favorites and freedmen who enriched themselves at the empire's expense. The Senate lost influence, and many officials cared more about bribes than justice. The stability of the Golden Age quickly faded as Rome's leadership became unpredictable. The people of Rome initially enjoyed Commodus's games and spectacles, but the army and Senate grew disgusted with his behavior. In AD 192, a conspiracy formed. On New Year's Eve, Commodus was strangled in his bath, ending his chaotic reign. But his death did not bring stability, unleashed another storm. With no clear successor, Rome plunged into yet another civil war. This period, beginning in AD 193, is sometimes called the Year of the Five Emperors. Generals and officials across the empire competed for power, bribing the Praetorian Guard and using their legions to march on Rome. One emperor, Pertinax, lasted only 87 days before being murdered. Another, Didius Julianus, literally bought the throne from the Praetorians, but was soon overthrown. Out of the chaos rose Septimius Severus, a general from North Africa who marched his legions into Rome and seized power. Severus was strong and ruthless. He restored order, strengthened the army, and expanded the empire's borders in the East and Africa. But his rule also deepened Rome's dependence on the military. The army became the true source of imperial power, and emperors who failed to keep the legions loyal were doomed. The Severan dynasty continued with Severus's sons, Caracalla and Geta. Caracalla became infamous for murdering his own brother and ruling with cruelty. However, he also made a significant change. In AD 212, he granted Roman citizenship to nearly all freemen in the empire. While this gave many new rights, it was also a way to expand the tax base. After the Severans, Rome slipped further into instability. Corruption, civil wars, and assassinations became common. By the mid-3rd century, the empire entered what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, and Rome's very survival seemed uncertain. The death of Commodus ended Rome's golden era. What followed was a slow but steady unraveling. The empire was still vast and powerful, but inside cracks were forming. After the death of Commodus and the troubled Severan dynasty, Rome entered a nightmare period known as the crisis of the 3rd century AD, 235 to 284. For nearly 50 years, the empire was torn apart by constant invasions, civil wars, plagues, and economic collapse. At times it seemed Rome might not survive at all. The crisis began with the assassination of Emperor Alexander Severus in AD 235. After that, generals across the empire realized they could seize power if their legions supported them. The result was chaos. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors ruled Rome, many lasting only months before being murdered or overthrown. The empire became a revolving door of short-lived rulers, each rising from the army and falling to the next ambitious commander. While Rome's leadership crumbled, its enemies struck. In the north, Germanic tribes like the Goths and Vandals crossed the borders, raiding provinces and even threatening Italy itself. In the east, the powerful Sassanid Persian Empire launched invasions, capturing key territories and even defeating and capturing a Roman emperor, Valerian, in AD 260. His humiliating fate, paraded in chains and reportedly used as a human footstool by the Persian king, shocked the Roman world. Inside the empire, things were just as bad. The economy collapsed under the weight of endless wars. To pay soldiers, emperors minted more coins with less silver, causing massive inflation. Trade declined, cities shrank, and famine spread. A deadly plague, possibly smallpox or measles, swept through the empire, killing thousands. The once mighty empire looked weak and broken. During this time, parts of the empire even broke away entirely. In the west, the Gallic Empire, made up of Gaul, Spain, and Britain, ruled independently for nearly 15 years. In the east, the wealthy city of Palmyra, under Queen Zenobia, also declared independence, carving out a separate kingdom. Rome was literally splitting apart, yet even in this time of disaster, Rome showed its resilience. A few strong emperors managed to push back against collapse. One of the most important was Emperor Aurelian, ruled AD 270 to 275. Known as the Restorer of the World, Aurelian reunited the empire by defeating both the Gallic Empire in the west and Zenobia's Palmyrene Empire in the east. He also strengthened Rome's defenses by building the Aurelian Walls, which still stand in parts of Rome today. Though assassinated before he could finish his reforms, Aurelian saved the empire from total disintegration. Despite temporary recoveries, the crisis of the 3rd century left scars. It showed that by the late 3rd century, the Roman Empire was battered by invasions, bankrupt from inflation, and exhausted by endless civil wars. Then, in AD 284, a soldier named Diocletian rose to power. He was a tough, practical leader who understood that Rome could not survive with old methods. To save the empire, he introduced bold reforms that reshaped Roman government forever. Diocletian began by addressing the most urgent problem, the chaos of leadership. For decades, emperors had risen and fallen with dizzying speed. Diocletian believed no single man could control such a vast empire. His solution was the tetrarchy, or rule of 4. He divided the empire into 2, Havus and Westich, ruled by an Augustus senior emperor, and assisted by a Caesar. Junior emperor, Diocletian ruled the east himself, while his emperor Maximian governed the West. Beneath them, the Caesars were groomed to succeed, ensuring smooth transitions of power. This system created stability. For the first time in decades, Rome had clear succession plans and multiple rulers able to defend different frontiers. The tetrarchy wasn't perfect, it depended on cooperation, but it gave the empire a badly needed structure. Diocletian also reformed the military. He reorganized the legions, placing mobile field armies deeper inside the empire, while frontier troops defended the borders. This allowed Rome to respond more flexibly to invasions. He increased the size of the army and improved discipline, making the military once again the backbone of the empire. Economically, Diocletian tried to stop inflation, which had destroyed the value of Roman money. He introduced new coins with higher metal content and issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, which attempted to set fixed prices and wages across the empire. While this law was difficult to enforce and often ignored, it showed his effort to stabilize Rome's struggling economy. One of Diocletian's most controversial actions was his persecution of Christians. He saw the growing Christian faith as a threat to Roman unity because Christians refused to worship the emperor or the old gods. Around AD 303, he launched the most severe persecution in Roman history, destroying churches, burning scriptures, and forcing Christians to renounce their faith. Many refused, becoming martyrs. Ironically, instead of destroying Christianity, this persecution made it stronger, as the faith spread even further in the years to come. Despite his harshness, Diocletian succeeded in giving Rome stability. He ruled for 21 years, longer than any emperor since Augustus. In AD 305, in an unprecedented move, he voluntarily abdicated the throne and retired to his palace in modern-day Croatia, where he spent his final years tending gardens. His retirement shocked the Roman world. But it proved he was not obsessed with personal power. His goal had always been the survival of the empire. Diocletian's reforms gave Rome a second wind. The empire was more organized, its military stronger, and its leadership system clearer. But his division of the empire also had a lasting effect. While it solved immediate problems, it highlighted that Rome was now too vast to be ruled as one. The idea of a split empire East and West would outlive him, eventually leading to two very different destinies for the Roman world. After Diocletian retired, his system of the Tetrarchy quickly collapsed. Rival emperors fought for control, and civil wars once again shook the empire. Out of this chaos emerged a man who would not only reunite Rome, but also reshape its culture, religion, and identity forever: Constantine the Great. Constantine rose to power in the early 4th century. A skilled general and shrewd politician, he fought his way through a series of battles against rival claimants. His most famous victory came at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in AD 312. According to legend, on the night before the battle, Constantine saw a vision in the sky: a cross of light with the words in this sign, "Conquer." He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields. And the next day, he defeated his enemy, Maxentius. This moment became one of the most important turning points in history, as Constantine linked his victory to the Christian God. In AD 313, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting freedom of religion throughout the empire. For the first time, Christianity was legalized after centuries of persecution. Churches were built openly, bishops gained influence, and the faith spread rapidly. Constantine himself became a patron of Christianity, donating land and wealth to the church. Though he was baptized only on his deathbed in AD 337, he laid the foundation for Rome to become a Christian empire. Constantine also reformed the empire politically and militarily. He reorganized the army, creating more mobile units to defend the frontiers, and restructured the government to reduce corruption. To stabilize the economy, he introduced a new gold coin, the solidus, which remained a stable currency for centuries. One of his most lasting legacies was the founding of a new capital. In AD 330, he rebuilt the ancient city of Byzantium on the Bosporus and renamed it Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. The city's location was perfect. It controlled trade routes between Europe and Asia and was easier to defend than Rome. Constantinople grew into one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, becoming the heart of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years. Constantine also strengthened the unity of the Church. Disputes were dividing Christians over the nature of Christ and doctrine. In AD 325, he convened the Council of Nicaea, the first ecumenical council of the Church. Here, bishops established a common statement of faith, the Nicene Creed, which remains central to Christianity today. Constantine's role as a mediator between church and state set the stage for future emperors to influence religious affairs. By the end of his reign, Constantine had achieved what few before him could. He reunited the empire, stabilized it, and given it a new identity. Rome was no longer just a pagan empire of temples, and God's it was becoming a Christian empire, guided by a faith that would outlast the empire itself. Constantine's reign marked a true transformation. He was a bridge between the old Rome and the new. After the death of Constantine in AD 337, the Roman Empire entered a new phase. Though it remained mighty, it was increasingly difficult to govern as a single united state. Constantine's sons initially divided the empire among themselves, but constant rivalry and civil wars weakened unity. By the late 4th century, the split between East and West had become permanent, and the empire's survival would depend on which half adapted best. The eastern half, ruled from Constantinople, was wealthy and well-defended. It controlled key trade routes between Asia and Europe, had strong walls, and enjoyed rich agricultural lands. The West, centered on Rome, was poorer, less organized, and more exposed to barbarian invasions. This imbalance would shape the fate of the empire. One of the most important emperors during this time was Theodosius. The first ruled 379 to 395. He is remembered for making Christianity the official state religion of the Roman Empire. Pagan temples were closed, old rituals banned, and the church became deeply tied to imperial power. While this unified the empire spiritually, it also transformed Roman culture forever. The gods of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus faded into history, replaced by Christianity as the guiding force of Roman identity. But Theodosius's death in 395 marked the final division. He split the empire between his two sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. From this point onward, the Roman Empire was permanently divided into two halves. Though both called themselves Roman, their futures would be very different. The Western Empire faced enormous challenges. Its economy was weaker, its tax base smaller, and its borders more vulnerable. Germanic tribes like the Visigoths, Vandals, and Franks pressed against the frontiers. Rome no longer had the manpower or money to defend all its lands. To make matters worse, many emperors in the West were weak, often controlled by powerful generals or court officials. In contrast, the Eastern Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, remained strong. Constantinople's strategic position, massive walls, and wealth allowed it to survive attacks that would crush the West. Eastern emperors also had more stable administrations, giving them the ability to resist decline for centuries. The pressures on the West became clear with the Gothic migrations. Driven by the terrifying advance of the Huns from Central Asia, Gothic tribes flooded into Roman lands, seeking refuge. Rome struggled to control them, leading to rebellions and battles. In 378, the Roman army suffered a catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Adrianople, where the Eastern Emperor Valens was killed fighting the Goths. This defeat showed the empire was no longer invincible. Barbarian tribes could now destroy Roman armies. The late 4th century revealed a painful truth. Rome was too large, too stretched, and too divided to rule as it once had. The East adapted and endured, but the West staggered under constant attacks and internal weakness. Though emperors still sat in Rome and later Ravenna, their authority was fading. The once mighty empire was beginning to crumble. The stage was set for the dramatic fall of the Western Roman Empire, a fall that would shake the ancient world and mark the end of classical Rome. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, the Western Roman Empire was collapsing under the weight of constant invasions, political weakness, and economic decline. The empire that had once stretched across Europe, Africa, and Asia was now struggling just to defend Italy itself. The first great shock came from the Visigoths. It's pushed westward by the terrifying advance of the Huns. The Visigoths sought refuge inside Roman borders. At first, the Romans agreed, but corruption and mistreatment drove the Goths to rebellion. In AD 378, at the Battle of Adrianople, they annihilated a Roman army and killed the Eastern Emperor Valens. This defeat shattered Rome's reputation for invincibility. In the West, things grew even worse. In AD 410, under their king Alaric, the Visigoths marched into Italy and did the unthinkable. They sacked the city of Rome. For 3 days, the Eternal City was looted. Though Rome had lost political importance by then, the emperors ruled from Ravenna. The psychological blow was enormous. For centuries, Rome had been the heart of the world, and now it lay at the mercy of barbarian armies. The shock rippled across the empire. The invasions didn't stop there. Other Germanic tribes poured into Roman lands. The Vandals crossed into North Africa, seizing its rich provinces and cutting off Rome's food supply. In AD 455, they too sacked Rome, this time stripping it of treasures and taking captives. The Franks and Burgundians established kingdoms in Gaul, while the Angles and Saxons began settling in Britain. The Western Empire was being carved up piece by piece. Meanwhile, a new terror appeared. The Huns, led by the fearsome Attila. Called the Scourge of God, Attila invaded Gaul and Italy in the mid-5th century. His armies burned cities and spread fear everywhere they went, though he was eventually stopped by a coalition of Romans and Visigoths at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in AD 451. The damage was done. The West was exhausted, its resources drained, and its people demoralized. Inside the empire, leadership was weak. Emperors rose and fell quickly, often puppets of powerful generals. Corruption, civil wars, and economic collapse made things worse. By the mid-5th century, the Western Empire controlled little beyond Italy itself. The final blow came in AD 476, when the last Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic general Odoacer. Odoacer declared himself king of Italy and sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, signaling that the Western Roman Empire was no more. For historians, this year marks the official fall of Rome. But Rome did not vanish overnight. Its laws, culture, and traditions lived on in the kingdoms of Europe. The Eastern Empire, centered in Constantinople, continued for nearly another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire. Yet for the West, the ancient world had ended. The Middle Ages had begun. The fall of the Western Roman Empire remains one of history. Its most dramatic events are a reminder that even the greatest powers can collapse under the weight of internal weakness and external pressure. The Western Roman Empire may have fallen in AD 476, but Rome never truly disappeared. Its legacy lived on in countless ways, shaping law, government, language, culture, religion, and even our modern imagination. The empire that began as a small village on the Tiber River left behind a mark so deep that we still feel it today. One of Rome's greatest legacies was its law. Roman legal principles, such as innocent until proven guilty, and equality under the law, became the foundation for justice systems in Europe and beyond. Even centuries after Rome's fall, kings, scholars, and nations studied Roman law to build their own. The idea that law should apply to all citizens, not just the powerful, came directly from Rome. Rome also transformed government. The Republic's concepts of checks and balances, senates, and assemblies influenced later systems, especially in the West. The very idea of a republic inspired thinkers during the Renaissance and Enlightenment. And even the founders of the United States looked to Rome when designing their constitution. In language, Rome gave us Latin, though the spoken form of Latin evolved into French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. Its influence never faded. Even English borrows heavily from Latin roots. For centuries, Latin remained the language of learning, science, and the church. Today, whenever we use words like justice, liberty, or empire, we are echoing Rome. Rome's achievements in engineering and architecture also endure. The Romans built roads so strong that some still exist today. Their aqueducts carried water across vast distances, a marvel of ancient engineering. Monuments like the Colosseum, Pantheon, and Roman Forum continue to awe visitors. Roman innovations in concrete and construction laid the groundwork for modern building techniques. Perhaps Rome's most enduring legacy was in religion. Christianity, once persecuted by Roman emperors, became the empire's official faith under Constantine and spread across Europe. Even after the fall of the West, the Roman Catholic Church carried forward Rome's traditions, laws, and influence. In many ways, the Church became a new form of empire, uniting Europe spiritually long after Rome's political power had ended. Culturally, Rome left behind literature, philosophy, and history. Writers like Virgil, Cicero, Tacitus, and Seneca are still read today. Roman values of discipline, duty, and civic responsibility influenced countless generations. Even in entertainment, gladiators, emperors, and Roman legions remain powerful symbols in books, films, and popular imagination. And then there is the simple idea of Rome itself. For centuries after the fall, rulers dreamed of restoring its glory. Charlemagne called his empire the Holy Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. The East proudly called itself Roman until it fell in 1453. Even in Russia, the Tsars claimed to inherit Rome's mantle, calling Moscow the Third Rome. The name never lost its magic. Rome may have fallen, but it never truly died. Its laws shape our courts. Its architecture inspires our cities. Its language fills our words, and its faith guides millions.